Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. It feels like every time I open a news app these days, the Israel-Hamas conflict is front and center. It can get pretty overwhelming trying to keep up with everything that's going on.
Absolutely. There's just so much information flying around. It's definitely hard to keep it all straight.
Yeah, and that's why we're here today. You've brought a really diverse collection of articles for this deep dive. We're looking at major outlets, the New York Times, the BBC, along with Al Jazeera and Haaretz for some different international viewpoints. We even have reports from Italian news sources like ANS.
Yeah, the goal is to get a truly global perspective.
Exactly. So are you ready to jump into all of this?
Let's do it.
Okay, well, first off, the International Criminal Court, the ICC, well, they just made a move that I don't think anyone saw coming.
Yeah, this isn't the first time that the ICC has been involved in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But this time, they've really upped the ante.
So what happened?
They issued arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, his former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, and Mohammed Deif, the head of Hamas's armed wing.
Hold on, arrest warrants. Like they're internationally wanted now.
Essentially, yes. And these warrants are for war crimes and crimes against humanity. This is a big deal because it's the first time that a sitting leader of a major Western ally has been accused of such serious offenses by a global court.
Wow. So what exactly are the charges against them? I saw something about starvation being used as a weapon of war. That sounds like something out of a history book, honestly.
It does, but that's exactly what the ICC is accusing Netanyahu and Gallant of. They're alleging that Israel intentionally deprived the civilian population in Gaza of necessities. We're talking food, water, medicine, even fuel and electricity.
And the ICC is claiming this was intentional?
Yes, they're claiming that it was a calculated strategy by Israel aimed at the destruction of the civilian population.
So how has Israel reacted to all of this? I can't imagine they're too happy.
You're right, they're not. The reports we've seen describe Israel's reaction as furious. They're calling the ICC's decision absurd, false, and some are even calling it anti-Semitic. They're completely rejecting the ICC's authority and denying any wrongdoing.
So what does that mean, exactly? Rejecting the ICC's authority. Are they saying the ICC has no power over them?
Essentially, yes. They're claiming that the ICC doesn't have jurisdiction in this case.
But is ignoring the ICC really the right move for Israel? I mean, won't this just further isolate them on the global stage?
That's a really good question, and the reaction from the rest of the world has been mixed. The United States has expressed deep concern, but they seem hesitant to fully condemn Israel, reaffirming their right to defend themselves against Hamas. But other countries, like France, have indicated they will respect the ICC's decision and will even arrest Netanyahu if he enters their territory.
So basically, this creates a dilemma for a lot of countries. On the one hand, they're legally bound to uphold the ICC's decisions, but on the other hand, they don't want to risk their relationships with Israel.
Exactly. It's a delicate balancing act.
Yeah, I see that. And then on top of all of this, you also have the Hamas leader, Mohammed Deif, who's been named in an arrest warrant too.
Right.
And what's he being accused of?
Well, he's accused of orchestrating that October 7th attack on Israel, the one that really kicked off this whole conflict. The ICC is calling it a mass killing, and they point to evidence suggesting his involvement in murder, rape, torture, and hostage-taking. But there's a twist to this.
Oh, really?
Israel actually claims that they killed Deif in an airstrike back in August. However, Hamas has never confirmed this, and the ICC says they can't verify his death either.
So he's essentially a ghost. Or Schrodinger's terrorist, maybe.
Pretty much.
Huh.
So we've got these major figures facing incredibly serious charges. The international community is sort of scrambling to figure out how to respond. And now we're not even sure if one of the key players is dead or alive.
Yeah. This is already so much to unpack, and we haven't even touched on the human cost of this conflict. I mean, with all this political back and forth, what about the people actually living in Gaza? How are they being impacted by all of this?
That's an important question, and it's something that often gets overshadowed by the headlines.
Yeah, it's a devastating situation. I mean, according to some reports, we're talking over 44,000 people dead.
Wow.
Yeah, and sources like the South China Morning Post and ABC News say more than half of them were women and children. The humanitarian situation is just dire. Access to basic necessities like food, water, medical care, it's all severely limited. And then you have the infrastructure. It's just devastated.
It's heartbreaking to think about. And, these arrest warrants, they could bring perpetrators to justice, but it doesn't erase what's already happened, right? Absolutely not. And I think it's crucial for everyone to keep that in mind as this whole story continues to develop. I mean, we've talked about the legal and political aspects, the potential diplomatic fallout, and the implications for peace talks. But behind all of this, there are real people whose lives have been completely shattered.
Yeah, you're right. It's easy to get lost in the political stuff and forget about the human cost.
Right.
Okay, so let's talk about those practical implications for a moment. What do these arrest warrants actually mean for Netanyahu and Gallant?
Well, for starters, they're now internationally wanted suspects. That means over 120 countries are obligated to enforce those ICC warrants.
So, no more popping over to Europe for a weekend getaway.
Not exactly. It definitely puts a serious crimp in their travel plans. Imagine being the prime minister and not being able to leave your own country,
Yeah, that would make international relations a little tricky.
to say the least. And while it's unlikely they'll actually ever see the inside of an ICC courtroom, these warrants carry significant moral and diplomatic weight. It's a real stain on their reputation, a constant reminder of the accusations.
Right, right. Okay, so we've touched on how the world is reacting, but what does this mean for the future of the Israel-Hamas conflict itself? Can they even attempt peace negotiations with these charges hanging over Netanyahu's head?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Ah.
The articles we've been looking at, they offer some clues, but no easy answers. Some experts think these warrants could actually hurt peace efforts. I mean, imagine trying to negotiate a ceasefire when one of the key players is an internationally wanted suspect.
Yeah, it's not exactly building trust, and we haven't even talked about how Hamas might use this to their advantage.
Exactly. They've already publicly welcomed the arrest warrants. They're calling it a victory, a step towards justice. And you can bet they're going to leverage this on the international stage to try and further delegitimize Israel and gain support for their cause. This is a propaganda win for them, no doubt.
It definitely seems that way. And then, on top of that, you have to wonder how the Israeli public is going to react to their leader being labeled a war criminal. Will this strengthen Netanyahu's position? Will people rally around him? Or could it actually weaken his support and lead to more political instability within Israel?
It's certainly a possibility. There are just so many layers to this situation, and the potential consequences are far-reaching. And remember, this all ties back to Mohammed Deif, too.
Oh, right, the Hamas leader. We were talking earlier about how no one's really sure if he's dead or alive.
Exactly. If he is alive, this arrest warrant could make him an even more potent symbol for Hamas. It might embolden them, make them even less willing to compromise in any future negotiations.
So much uncertainty. It feels like we're standing at a crossroads and we can't see what's ahead.
That's a really good analogy. And as we move forward through all of this uncertainty, I think it's important to consider the long-term implications.
Okay, what are some of the potential long-term consequences of these arrest warrants?
Well, on a global scale, this could actually set a precedent for holding powerful leaders accountable for war crimes. It could signal a real shift in international norms where impunity is no longer tolerated.
It's definitely a landmark case in that sense, but could it also lead to some unintended consequences? Could it make countries less likely to engage in peace negotiations out of fear that their leaders might be prosecuted?
It's a valid concern, and it's why it's so crucial to have these conversations, to weigh the potential benefits against the risks, and to try and consider all sides of this issue.
I agree, and I think it's important to acknowledge that there are no easy answers here. This is an incredibly complex situation, and there are strong arguments on all sides.
I completely agree. There are deeply held beliefs and grievances on both sides of this conflict, and trying to oversimplify the situation or demonize one side over the other will only make things worse and prevent any real progress toward peace.
So where do we go from here? How can we, as informed individuals, make sense of all this and contribute to a more peaceful future?
That's a great question. And honestly, I think it deserves a deep dive of its own. But for now, I'll leave you with this thought. Keep engaging with this issue. Seek out different viewpoints. Challenge your own assumptions. And don't be afraid to really dig in, ask those tough questions and wrestle with the complexities. Remember, true understanding really requires empathy. You got to be willing to see the world through other people's eyes.
Those are wise words to keep in mind, for sure. Well, folks, it looks like it's time for us to resurface from this deep dive. Phew, that was some heavy stuff to unpack.
It really was. A dense and multifaceted topic, for sure. But hopefully our exploration has given you a better understanding of just how complex this conflict is.
Yeah, I think so too. And remember, everyone, even with all of this information, we've honestly just scratched the surface. So keep those news feeds coming, those critical thinking caps on, and stay engaged with this evolving situation.
And as you learn and explore, never forget the human side of all this. There are real people on all sides of this conflict whose lives are directly impacted by these events.
Very well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep diving deep.